What's going on, guys, in the works, and welcome to a Battlefield 3 showdown between the ACW-R Suppressed and the AS VAL. Now, this is one of the showdowns that a lot of people have requested in the past, and it's kind of a strange one. They do share a lot of similarities. A lot of people may say that it seems a little bit imbalanced, but it's two of my favorite weapons in the game, and I think it'll be a fun showdown to kind of look at some of the strengths and weaknesses of each weapon. So it's definitely been a while since we've done a showdown. It's been about a month and a half, but I asked you guys the other night, give me some good suggestions. And one suggestion I continually get is the AS VAL versus the ACW-R Suppressed. Now, for all practical purposes, we will be focusing on the base stats of the ACW-R. I'll talk a little bit about the effects of the suppressor on it, but I thought it would put it more on an even playing field with the AS VAL since it is a suppressed weapon. Now, these are two of my favorite weapons. There's no secret that I have a love affair with the ACR. I mean, it's one of my favorite weapons in the game. It is my most used weapon by a pretty large margin, so I have had my fair share of experiences with both the ACR and the AS VAL. The AS VAL is definitely my favorite PDW, my most used PDW. Now, even though the AS VAL is a PDW which can be used on any kit, and the ACW-R is an engineer-only weapon, they do have some slight similarities in terms of stats. So let's take a look at this here. You can see they do have a very similar damage model, 20 max damage, but then the ACW-R drops off to a 16.7, where the AS VAL holds its damage a little bit longer at 18.4. The AS VAL also has a slight edge in RPMs by 50, and also has a faster one in the chamber reload by a tenth of a second, but the ACW-R does have a quicker empty reload by a pretty substantial margin, and that's pretty important because the ACW-R only has a 26 round magazine, 27 with one in the chamber, whereas the AS VAL starts off with a base 20 round magazine, and with extended mags you can bump it up to 30 and 31 with one in the chamber. Now, a lot of people will look at this and say this showdown is completely off the wall, the AS VAL blows the ACW-R out of the water. And I can definitely see that. I'm a big proponent of both of these weapons. This is going to be very difficult for me to choose one over the other, but there are some key differences that really separate them from the other one. Let's start with attachments. Being a PDW, the AS VAL is probably at the biggest disadvantage in this showdown because you have to give up the laser sight and flashlight if you want to run extended mags. And you pretty much have to run extended mags on the AS VAL. It's really what makes this weapon awesome. It didn't even have extended mags until one of the big patches that came out in February that really changed the dynamic of the AS VAL. So it is pretty limited on what you can run on it because you pretty much are stuck running the extended mags. You can't really worry about running laser sight or anything like that. Whereas the ACW-R, you've got a little bit more leeway. Now, like I said, I want to focus on the ACW-R Suppressed since the AS VAL comes default with a suppressor. So it's got a built-in suppressor, and it isn't really hurting any sort of statistics in terms of that because it is part of the weapon. Where the ACW-R does lose some pretty big stats when you slap a suppressor on it because it goes from being a 500 meter per second bullet velocity down to around 300, which is around what the AS VAL's is as well. I think the AS VAL has around 333 meters per second, so pretty similar when they both have a suppressor on it, but taking it down from a 500 meter per second weapon down to 300, that's a substantial drop off, and a lot of people aren't willing to do that. But if you've played a lot with the ACW-R like I have, you'll know that's really not that big of a deal because most of your engagements are going to be at the medium range. And the reason why I like the suppressor so much on the ACW-R is because it keeps you off the radar, but you're not really penalized a ton with it because it's always a 6 bullet kill for the most part with the ACR. I mean, that's its biggest advantage, is the fact that it holds its damage so long. The AS VAL holds a little bit more damage though, and it makes it a very deadly weapon at long range. The one key feature that a lot of people don't know about the AS VAL is that when aiming down sights standing completely still, this thing has no bullet deviation. It has the exact same aim down sight accuracy of a sniper rifle. However, when you start to move around a little bit, that goes completely out of the window. So you've got to train yourself to come to a complete stop when shooting the AS VAL if you want ultimate accuracy, because it goes up to a 1.5 deviation when aiming down sights and moving with the AS VAL. So that's a pretty big change. I mean, that's 150% more bullet deviation when you're moving around aiming down sight with the AS VAL. Now, to put it in perspective, while standing still and aiming down sights, the ACW-R has an aim down sight spread about 0.3. That's pretty good. That's a lot better than some of the other engineer weapons, but it's definitely nothing compared to the AS VAL. But when you're moving around, the ACR blows the AS VAL out of the water. Its aim down sight accuracy is almost 0.6 better, and that's a big deal. That means while you're on the move, the ACR is definitely going to outshoot the AS VAL in terms of getting bullets on target. Now the 50 rounds per minute definitely comes into play in that scenario. The fact that it does shoot 900 rounds per minute versus the ACW-R only shoots 850. If you're going head to head while moving, you know, the AS VAL may be able to bail itself out of that situation just because it does shoot 50 rounds per minute faster. But I think for the most part, if you're playing a little bit more aggressive, sometimes the ACR can be a little bit better in that respect than the AS VAL. I mean, that's really a very situational stat, but it's one that we don't want to overlook. Now you guys may be asking yourself, well, what about Hipfire? Hipfire is pretty important when you're talking about a weapon that's going to be getting into the fray playing a little bit more aggressive. And honestly, the AS VAL and the ACW-R both have pretty comparable hipfires, and they're both pretty crappy. I mean, considering that the AS VAL is a PDW, it's probably got one of the worst hipfires out of the bunch. It's definitely not a weapon that you want to mainly hipfire. You definitely want to be aiming this thing. The same goes for the ACR. It's one of the, the poorer hipfiring weapons out of the engineer class. And when you put a suppressor on the ACR, it gets even worse. It goes down quite substantially. So hipfire on both of these weapons are not really that great. So I think in that category, it's definitely a tie. If you're using the ACR without a suppressor, though, it's definitely going to have better hipfire than the AS VAL. But again, that's a pretty situational stat that I really don't think has that big of an impact on the weapons because they're not made for being a hipfire weapon. These are more about getting your ammo on target. They're an accuracy weapon. That's how you should really perceive the AS VAL and the ACW-R, and I think that's where they really hold a lot of their similarities. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, reload's not a huge factor. They both reload pretty swiftly. Empty reload on the ACR is a little bit quicker. Pretty situational, but that's a good thing because it does have less rounds in the chamber. So at this point, you're probably asking yourself, Jake, you've got to pick one. I know that you love both of these weapons, but you've got to pick one. And honestly, guys, it's tough. I know that the AS VAL can be used on the engineer kit, and it can also be used on any other kit in the game, whereas the ACR is relegated only to the engineer. But I think the ACR is a little bit more versatile. You can put more attachments on it. You can take it into more situations. But that's not to say the AS VAL isn't versatile in its own right. Very few situations will you find yourself in with the AS VAL where you feel like you're at an extreme disadvantage. Yeah, the hipfire is a little bit crappy, and the one way that the ACR can compensate for its hipfire is the fact that you can slap a laser sight on it and make it a little bit more versatile. So, it's tough, but I definitely think that I have to give my edge to the AS VAL, and it hurts for me to say that, just because the ACR is probably my favorite engineer weapon, probably my favorite weapon in the game, besides maybe the SV98. But I think that, just in my experiences, the AS VAL just tends to outshoot it in a lot of the ways that I play. It fits my playstyle, but they both really, it's really close. So let me know in the Facebook poll. The link will be in the description. Make sure to like the Facebook page, vote in the poll while you're over there. And if you missed any of my past videos, here's a chance to catch up, and I will see you guys next time. Peace.